First of all, with great happiness, I invite Dr. Namrita Kotari, Assistant Professor and Head Department of Political Science, South Calcutta Girls College, Kolkata. Ma'am will be the chair of today's session. And ma'am had completed her doctoral research on Jainism, an inquiry into its emergence, background, and socio-political values in it from University of Calcutta. And her postdoctoral research was on Shantara, a Jain ritual of fast unto death from Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Calcutta. And she had published articles in 13 various journals and 12 book chapters in different edited volumes. And she had published two books on Jainism and social issues. Her areas of interest are Jain religion and philosophy, comparative religion, human rights, ecology, religion and politics, and Indian constitution. And so we found that ma'am is the apt person to chair today's session. Ma'am, on behalf of GFYP and myself, hearty welcome to our forum. And now, with immense pleasure and privilege, I welcome our key speaker and my good friend, Dr. Jinesh Seth, Dharmanand Postdoctoral Research Fellow in Jain Studies, Department of Philosophy, School of Philosophy, Theology and Religion, University of Birmingham, UK. And today he will be talking on between theism and atheism, a Jain paradigm of God. He has completed his doctoral research from the Department of Philosophy, Mumbai University, and his topic was on the critical investigation of Jain doctrine of Anekantavada and some of its hitherto unexplored dimensions. And his research interests are especially in Indian philosophy, Jain epistemology, the problems of philosophy in Jain context. So, Dr. Jinesh, on behalf of GFYP and myself, a hearty welcome to our forum. And last but not least, I welcome our dear ma'am, Professor Srikala Nair, the backbone of GFYP and head of the Department of Philosophy, Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit, and Director, International School for Sri Shankaracharya Studies, Kaladi. And happy to see you, ma'am, and hearty welcome to today's program. And I would like to welcome all the academicians, research scholars, and the students to our forum. Welcome, dear all. So, may I have the pleasure to welcome Namrita ma'am to introduce the theme and chair the session. Dear ma'am, over to you.
Thank you so much, Simi, for giving me the opportunity in this such a wonderful topic. Uh, Very good evening to all the dignitaries over here, Srilekha ji and others. The topic is very interesting and it is very important theme for nowadays, a topic of discussion where religion and politics are always at the loggerhead. They are, the politicians are after religion. They are, all of them are thinking they are protecting the religion and all. In this scenario, the understanding of the conception of God is very important. So between the topic is, which Jinesh will discuss later on, is between theism and atheism, a Jain paradigm of God. To me, first I want to clarify these two concept before all of you. Though I know you people know this, what is theism, atheism. Still, I will give a brief meaning of both the terms. As we know, this atheism means the suspension or lack of belief about the existence of the God. Its evidence, as we know, is found in the ancient Jewish religion and also Indian Vedic religion, like in Rig Veda. Buddha, as we know, is considered as atheist because they are reborn as humans, impermanent and not all powerful. Therefore, we know that Buddha also teaches the same thing, that no God can save a person from the world of suffering and miseries, because liberation must be achieved by a person's own efforts. Modern atheism, as we know, which started from the Feuerbach, who also influenced Karl Marx, that the God is the projection of humanity's own self alienation. By worshipping God, humans are actually worshipping themselves. And the best example which Feuerbach is giving is the Jesus, a man worshipped as a God. Even the postmodernist thinkers, they interfere in this affair of God and they embrace this atheist position with their proclamation that God is dead. It results in the self devaluation of highest values. So death of God to them actually also asserts the death of self. So in this category of atheism, we can consider the some of Nyaya philosophy, Charvakya, Sankhya, Jainism, Buddha, and also early Mimamsa. Now, coming to this theism, it actually derived, all you know, we derived from the Greek word theos, which means God. In Judo-Christian Islamic tradition, it refers to the transient and the personal deity who creates a world from nothing and sustains it and governs it. So this type of God is actually omnipotent, omnicompetent, omnipresent, and it reveals about the human divine relationship. Apart from these two things, there is another concept which we must know, that is deism, 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 which means the defense of rationality of religion in the light of Newtonian scientific theories. It denies the God personality and governs the world. It denies the revelation, these miracles, this divine, providence, because these features to them are irrationals. Um, After discussing these things, as we know, Jinesh will discuss about Jain theory of God and all. So briefly, I just introduce about this to you all. As we know, Jainism as such, it's developed as a revolt against the Vedic religion. And Vedic religion, they supported the creator God. God is everything, omnipotent. So definitely, the Jain theory, Jain philosophy developed against it. In Sutra Kritanga Shruta, what we find, I quote, that someone say that this universe is created by Brahma, but this is wrong. This is indeed the ignorance of some to say that this world is created by God. Quote close. So we will see that this conception of God in the Jain tradition, where the God considered by others as a perfect being, then it was often questioned by Jain tradition, if God were perfect, why his creation were so imperfect? Why, if the world is the creation of a perfect being, how it is that there are sorrows, sufferings, and miseries, and we know this miseries and wants and equity in this created being. So Jains and Buddhists actually went on further to emphasize that if the woes and troubles of the Creator are to be accounted for by the acts of the Creator themselves, and if the Creator God could be held responsible for them, then what is the point of accepting the outsider God? It's a very pertinent question raised by both the tradition. So the Jains eliminated these outside creator, so-called God, from their process of thinking. They accepted the world as it is and tried to account for the miseries. Buddhism says that the misery is the result of tanha, which means unquenchable thirst for the existence on the part of the creatures themselves. So Jainism themselves asserts that miseries are imperfect selves, and due to the series of karma, this on the part of an unemancipated soul for which man comes to live in this world again and again. Hence, if any goodhood is attached, it is to be attached to a person who is perfectly emancipated soul, being possession of omniscience, and perfectly all powerful, man being absolutely free from all taints of selfishness. So he is a person who saw this eternal varieties as they were and realized the truth as they came to him. So the Jains actually they said there's no need to accept an outsider creator God, and this is the first principle also which Jain formulated against the Vedic conception of the creator God. Even we know the word Tirthankas, which means that those who the means who help the human beings to cross the ocean of samsara by providing them with a vessel of soul in a form of dharma. As we also know, we have 24 tirthankas. We never call them as God as before. हम लोग उन लोगों को क्या बोलते हैं, तीर्थंकर, वी कॉल्ड देम द तीर्थंकर नॉट गॉड, राइट फ्रॉम द ऋषभदेव टू Mahavira, because they, through their karma, they actually got the liberation of soul through their samyak jnana, samyak charitra, and samyak darshan. Finally they get the liberation of the soul. So this is how the Jain conception of God, they rejected it, and how the around the karma and the other things the Jain philosophy revolved on. So now, without much ado, I am hand over the forum to Jignesh. He will explain more elaborately about this, the paradigm of God, and between the, the theism and atheism, between this, how he can able to solve out this problem. We are eager to hear him. Now up to you, Jignesh. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Namrita ma'am, for your lucid explanation on the concerned theme. Now I invite Dr. Jinesh for the presentation, and his talk will be on Between Theism and Atheism, a Jain Paradigm of God. Okay, Jinesh.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Shimi, Dr. Namrata ma'am, and the entire um, audience who are present today. I would also like to thank the Global Youth Forum for Philosophers for inviting me for this talk today. Um, so to begin with, I'll first try to share my screen, and I think you are able to see the screen, right?
Yes,
Okay, thank you. So, as Dr. Namrata ma'am has already introduced the theme, so this makes it a bit easier for me now. Um, the idea that I'm trying to present via this talk and this paper is that um, the Jain position on the notion of God is something that goes beyond the standard categories of theism and atheism. And although this is not part of my main research that I'm currently engaged with, but it is derived from some of the threads that are connected with it. So I'm mainly interested in how Anekantavada plays a role in dealing with various problems of philosophy. And this one is just one of them that I was trying to look at and see whether Jain philosophers have their own versions of both, or do they subscribe to one of the ends of the spectrum and deny the other altogether, or what exactly is going on with respect to theism atheism debate. So, what I'll try to argue today is that this position is neither exclusively theistic nor atheistic. It's somewhere between the two. It is inclusive of both to a certain extent, and to a certain extent, it denies both. So, to proceed further, this is how we will go today. I'll start with a brief background, but much of it is not required now, so I'll proceed further. And then two main arguments. One set of arguments would be against theism, and another set of arguments would be for theism. And when I say against theism, then it somewhere falls in line with what atheists talk about. And when I say for theism, it somewhere goes against what atheists subscribe to. So there are certain, properties which theistic theologians, philosophers have continued to ascribe to God. So, one of them being that the God is the creator of this universe, God is eternal, God is having omnipotence, and the divine will leads to certain other activities. Then there is divine grace, which is offered to those who practice devotion and those who worship God. Then the God is one, and there is no one like him, and that at most the mundane souls, the sansari jivas, can attain moksha, but they cannot become God. And then God is eternal and loving as well. And there are certain other properties which the atheists do not agree with, saying that the God cannot. There is no perfect being as such. I mean, who is perfect over here? So when you say for theism, and these are certain properties which the Jainas will try to defend, but it goes in line with what atheists also talk about. So the Jainas would try to see that how is it possible for someone to be a perfect being. There are certain arguments for omniscience. There is an argument that the Jinna or the Tirthankara must be worshipped, even though there is no place for divine grace or divine will. At the same time, the Jinnas or the Jain Tirthankaras, they are apta, like authoritative people, and they also have divine revelation. So all these elements kind of make an impression that there are some theistic elements. At the same time, there are certain atheistic elements. So I'll proceed one by one with respect to each of them and try to show that uh, how two different sets of properties are present at the same time. And with this, what emerges is a Jain paradigm of God, and that is something that is sui generis, jatyantara, which is just beyond the standard categories of theism and atheism. At the end, I'll just also touch upon some of the implications of what this paradigm has for, and how does it relate with some of the other problems that philosophers of religion, philosophy of religion, has remained occupied with. So, for instance, problem of evil. Also, the problem of consciousness. The how do you explain the emergence of consciousness? If consciousness was created, then all those subsequent questions that originate from there. Does this Jain paradigm of God has any implication on that as well? We will see very briefly at the end. So to begin with, I'll first offer you some introduction. So when we talk about Indian philosophy, and this is one of the standard categorization that textbooks on Indian philosophy offer, and the division between heterodox and orthodox schools, where six of the systems are classified under orthodox, and the remaining three, like Jains, Buddhist, and Charvakas, are considered as heterodox. And the Sanskrit or the Shastriya equivalents for these are Astika, Nastika. And there are certain other terms as well, but let's stick to this one first. So, what exactly does this mean? I mean, does Nastika mean someone who doesn't believe in God, or does Nastika mean that someone who doesn't accept Vedas as authoritative? Well, it is kind of like not part of my paper currently, but I would like to just mention this in passing, that this categorization of Indian philosophy into orthodox, heterodox doesn't do much justice to the schools that are classified into either of the two categories. So, for instance, like Sankhyas, they do not have a place for God as such. Like, I mean, Patanjali yoga system does have, so which is why it is known as Seshwara Sankhya. But Sankhya's, like, there is just Purusha and Prakriti. So, philosophies, schools like Nayayikas, Vaisheshikas, they are hardcore realist, and common sense realism just goes with them. On the other hand, it's the Vedantins and the Mimamsakas who seem to be very much concerned with what the teachings of the Upanishads and the Vedas were exactly. So it's kind of not straightforwardly given that these are Vedic schools and these are not. Also, when it comes to God, again, it's hard or it's inadequate to label Jains and Buddhists as atheist and the other schools as theist, because even in Jainism and Buddhism, there are certain theistic elements which they try to define in their own way. So this entire classification of Indian philosophy into these two groups perhaps needs to be reconsidered. And Daya Krishna has already argued. So this is not just me saying. I mean, I'm all trying to put forth his arguments in order to uh, question this distinction. So Daya Krishna straightforwardly denies this entire categorization and is unhappy with how Indian philosophy is viewed in these lines. So if anyone is interested, maybe Three Myths of Indian Philosophy and other such essays, they're worth looking into. And yeah, so moving further, in what sense do we call Jains as atheistic? I mean, this is what the standard textbooks on Indian philosophy would consider Jains to be. But it's inadequate. So the terms which we usually find in Jain texts are like Paramatma, Parameshthi. This is a technical Jain term for supreme souls. Bhagavan, obviously, Ishvara, etc. But there are some more other terms like technical ones. Jina, Arahanta, Tirthankara, Siddha. All of these could be considered as somewhere equivalent to what goes by the term God. And there's a quote which I'll just try to read out once. Literally, so this is coming from um, a dictionary A to Z of Jainism by Christy Wiley, and this entry is of Siddhas, like when how are Siddhas defined. So, literally, one who has accomplished his goals, a term for a soul that has attained liberation, moksha, from the cycle of rebirth, sansara. Devoid of a body, it experiences its own true nature of infinite consciousness and bliss. It dwells forever in the Siddha Loka or Ishat Pragbhara Bhumi, which is located just above the heavenly realms, at the very top of the occupied universe, Lokakasha. Supreme souls, Paramatman, and God, Deva, are other terms for a liberated soul. And this is just a brief description of what a God is about in the Jain context. Now, this is what I would like to do. So, following Anekantavada, non one sidedness, ideally, the Jain philosopher must be able to say that the Jain worldview is neither exclusively theistic nor exclusively atheistic, and that it is both. So, it is theistic in some sense and atheistic in some other, and which could be captured by this phrase, Syat Theism and Syat Atheism, where Syat is the qualifier and the meaning of Syat is something like from a certain perspective. In other terms, it is sui generis, jatyantara. Now, what is anekanta? So these are some just two definitions that I'll mention briefly and move ahead. So it is about being jatyantara, being sui generis, which is about denying the two binaries and trying to uh, prepare a framework where both the extremes are somehow included, but they lose their absolutist stance. So they become non-absolute, but at the same time they are not denied altogether. Akalanka defines anekanta in terms of like existence itself. So anything that exists is considered to be non one-sided. So Some of the texts that I'll engage with today are Apta Mimansa and Apta Pariksha. Apta Mimansa is a text by Samantabhadra, who was somewhere around 4th, 5th century. The dates are inconclusive. This is followed by Akalanka, Vidyanandan, Yasha Vijaya, and there is an entire commentarial tradition. So all of them are commenting on Apta Mimansa, and each subsequent philosopher is commenting on the previous commentary as well. And the other text that we will also look into is Apta Pariksha. I mean, just a few verses that I'll discuss, and I mean, of course, not the entire text. But this is by Vidyanandan, again, 9th century something, and there is an auto commentary. So he's commenting on his own verses. Um, There are some attempts to arrive at what exactly Jain paradigm would look like. So this is perhaps the best introduction to Jain perspective on the philosophy of religion. And this includes God and the problem of evil and suffering and many other issues, free will and etc. as well. Many other themes that are very much common in philosophy of religion. And this is an excellent introduction to that. It's written by Professor Arvind Sharma. He has also written such books on other schools like on Hinduism as well, I think, and on perhaps on Buddhism. I'm not sure. So this is one of the source that one can look into. But the texts that I will be dealing with are not widely discussed. So this still remains a new investigation. There are some other attempts as well. Recently, there was this paper by Jeffrey Long in Sophia from a certain point of view, Jain theism and atheism. So what I'm trying to argue is again not something altogether new, but still this paper is much more introductory, and again, the text and the arguments that I'll discuss do not feature very seriously. So, but these are some other attempts. And then there are some scholars as well who have gone to the other extreme and labeled Jainism as theistic. And their basic argument was to show like how it's the other side of the spectrum that's more dominant rather than the atheistic paradigm. And also Hemant Shah also has written something on Jain theism. And so, but amongst all, I would consider this as one of the main introductory texts. And if anyone is interested, yeah, this is to the go-to textbook for a Jain perspective. So moving further and to the arguments. So first one is like against theism, and I'll try to touch upon each of these points briefly. So against the view that the God is a creator, against the view that God is a beginningless eternal entity, against the view that the God has divine will, or he offers divine grace, or that he is one, or that he loves. Um, so starting with like, so there is a denial of a creator God. It's not that the denial is of the God himself, but it's a denial of a God as a creator. And these are certain axioms. I mean, just as certain schools presume God to be the creator, and then later philosophers try to give or offer arguments in defense of such views, as has been the case with the philosophers in the West or in the East. I mean, theologians and philosophers have attempted to give a rational basis for religious beliefs, and this is what philosophy of religion is mainly concerned with. So, in the case of Jainas, there is a God, but he is not the creator. He's not supposed to be the creator. And with this there are many implications then. And then I mean, if the god is not the creator of this universe, then the standard question is that how do you create something out of nothing? And I think the Jainas do not have to answer this, because the god doesn't create the universe in the first place. So what is exactly the nature of universe? So they consider it to be anadi, like the universe just exists since beginningless time. Whereas on the god is considered to be sadi. It's someone, like you become god. It's not a given state, by default state of a being. I'll come to that in some time. Again, another problem with the creation argument is that how do you create uh, things which do not share the properties with you? So, is God material or is God spiritual? If God is conscious, and if, I mean, it can be assumed that God creates consciousness, but then what about things which are non-conscious? And if I can create, if I as a conscious entity can create things which are non-conscious, then either that I have to share the properties, or we can just assume that creation can happen randomly. Again, if the god has created the universe, then one has to also account for a desire. And if the god has a desire to create the universe, then the next question is why and when. Because why exactly does this desire come into place? What is the rational basis for it? And so such questions could be asked. And when exactly does this happen? Because in order to then justify one desire, one has to then assume a series of such desires, each one giving rise to the subsequent one. And there could be an infinite regress. Again, the problem of evil, which is also something that I'll discuss at the end. And the god is not considered to be eternal. So by eternal I mean a beginningless entity. So the god does continue to exist in the future endlessly, but there is a beginning to how Jains can see god, and that state is something that is achieved rather than something that is given. um, Also, what about omnipotence? So the Jainas say that the god does have it, but it's not exercised in terms of creation. It is exercised in terms of knowledge. So knowing everything is where their potential or their energy is mainly directed. So further, when we talk about the Jainas, how they consider God to be non-eternal, this is how the arguments go in Apta Pariksha. So the Jina or the Tirthankara is someone who becomes so. It is not possible, the Jainas argue, to be a beginningless perfect entity, and the terms for this are Anupaya Siddha. And it is so because if it was a possibility, if Anupaya Siddha is possible, then destruction of karmas is not possible, because that being has been a supreme perfect being since beginningless time. In order to become God, one must destroy them at a given time t, and thus he has a beginning. And then the Purva Paksha continues. Well, he does not have a beginning. The God is Sada Mukta and thus does not need to destroy the karmas. He does not have a beginning because he is the cause of body, senses, world, etc. It is so because they are effects. And this is the standard argument, the teleological argument or the cosmological argument that you would come across. So these effects are such that they must be caused by an intellectual being, and this is the standard uh, uh, position of all theistic philosophers, most of them, if not all. Of course, I cannot generalize. So, and then this debate continues. Vidyanandin examines these arguments, and then he argues against the entire notion of Ishwar Kartratva, Ishwarasya Jagat Kartratva Nirasaha. And this is Apta Pariksha, and it's Tika, verse paragraph 58 onwards. God cannot be the creator of body, senses, and the world, etc., because the beginninglessness cannot be validated by the pramanas. The hetu, like the reason caused by intellectual being, does not share a relation of invariable concomitance with the effects such as body, etc. So when you say that a pot is an effect because it is produced, and therefore it must have a cause, and therefore there is a potter. So this entire line of argument is presupposing that any production or any effect is necessarily caused by an intellectual being. But the Jainas argue that this is not a necessary relation. An effect could come into existence even without the help of an intellectual being. And there are many such effects in the universe which do not require any assistance from an intellectual being. And it is so because it is not possible to show that in some place and in some time there is non existence of the effects such as body, etc. So, this invariable concomitance would have been possible if these effects continue to be produced all the time and everywhere, because the God is supposed to be everywhere, omnipresent. The God is supposed to be eternal, beginningless, endless. And if the God is the creator or the producer of these effects, then they must continue to be produced all the time. For the Ishvara is supposed to be all pervasive across space and time. This again continues. Like if the Purva Pakshan says that the desire regulates creation, and then the Jainas say that this is not attainable. Why? Because then they ask, like, is this desire itself eternal or non-eternal? If the desire is eternal, then the effects must continue to be produced all the time. If the desire is non-eternal, then it leads to infinite regress, because then you would always require another desire for the previous one, and so on and so forth. Then there are certain arguments that continue. So absence of divine will, divine grace, etc. So in the Jaina context, when the devotees worship the Jina or the Tirthankara, they are supposed to not expect any divine interference in their own journey towards liberation. They, in fact, such attitudes are appreciated when the devotees turn up to the Jina and worship without asking for anything. Of course, asking is not considered to be in such derogatory, but still, in the Jaina context, what they say is that um, the Jinas or the Tirthankaras, they are passionless, and having a desire is considered as to be negative. So, offering love towards someone, being impartial or indifferent towards others, could be considered as a sign of some sort of attachment, even though it is divine love. So, this is something that the Jainas strongly argue for, saying that it's not possible to have attachments whatsoever, whether divine or otherwise. So, there is no scope for divine will, divine grace, etc. And I think this is common with the Shramanas in general, so even the Buddhist as well. And perhaps this is also a distinguishing mark of the Shramana tradition, that the entire journey towards liberation is something that one achieves via one's own efforts, Shrama, as the term goes. There are certain other ways to etymologically break down Shramana and derive its meaning when you look at Prakrit and Pali equivalents, but still, it's like emphasizes the Shramana tradition has its emphasis on putting forth efforts to get rid of samsara instead of asking God's grace or something like that. And the jinna or the god is then considered to be devoid of love or even compassion, because this compassion is considered to be a sign of attachment, even though divine. um, Elimination of suffering, if someone asks like what if the god is without love or compassion, and how does then he help others eliminate suffering? Because if he doesn't have compassion or love towards others, why would he care for the elimination of suffering of everyone else? And then the Jainas respond that, this is possible even without love or compassion. So for example, a lamp that destroys darkness, and similarly through the teachings, the Jinnah is a moral exemplar, and he serves as one, and he perhaps continues to inspire those who come to worship him to become like him. And this is one of the key difference that you would come across. The Jain paradigm or the Jain view of what a god is, and how is he defined with respect to the other traditions. So moving forward, I'll now then try to show which elements portray some threads of theism. And this is something interesting, because even though the god is not supposed to be the creator or eternal or someone who loves, still he is considered to be a perfect being. He has omniscience, he is worshipped, he is authoritative, there is divine revelation. So the scriptures are basically coming from such a source, and so on. And these are some of the arguments that I'll just try to introduce, but they are quite interesting. And so this is from Apta Mimansa by Samantabhadra, Karika 4. I'll not read the Sanskrit, but I'll just uh, touch upon the translations. So the argument is a standard one, and this is also employed by Aquinas once in one of his proofs for the existence of God, and this is an argument by gradation. What this means is that it is possible for someone to achieve a state of complete faultlessness, that is perfection, because of degrees of gradation. So someone is morally perfect to a certain degree, someone else is perfect to some further degrees of perfection, and eventually there must be someone who is totally completely perfect, because it is possible for gradation. It is possible that the degrees of perfection differ, and that there is a gradation that is evident across different individuals. So this is what the argument is all about. And this is like 4th 5th century Samantabhadra. I think this is one of the earliest proofs for the existence of God. Maybe I might be subject to correction, but I'll ask if someone could help me further on these lines, like which are the Indian philosophical schools which offer proofs for the existence of God during that era, like 3rd, 4th, 5th, somewhere in the early part of the first millennium. So this is what the argument is. In some individuals, there exists complete destruction of imperfections and wills. For given any absence of imperfections, there is something which exceeds it. Atishayanat. For example, complete removal of external and internal impurities of a substance like gold ore is possible on the availability of appropriate means. So it is possible that someone can completely eliminate them, just as it is possible to eliminate the impurities in object like gold. And this continues. So um, this has been rigorously defended by the Jainas. In fact, any Jain text on pramanas and epistemology and logic that you might come across will have at least one or two proof for omniscience. Maybe this is something that is very important for them, also because the entire agamas or the scriptures have their authority dependent on the jinna's omniscience. If the jinna's omniscience is not validated or sufficiently argued for, then the scriptures lose their scriptural authority. So the Jainas have really strongly defended the omniscience of the Jina. So this is a divine attribute which is attributed to the Tirthankaras, but certain other attributes were simply just rejected. And there is an entire debate on the Jaina view on omniscience with the Buddhists like Dharmakirti and with Kumarela's in his Shlokavartika. So Dharmakirti at one point says like, why do you want someone to be an omniscient? Why not just be knowledgeable of that which is um, uh, relevant and that which is most important? So Heya and Upadeya are the things which you must know, and everything else is just, it doesn't matter. And therefore he just sarcastically says, Kita Sankhya Parigyanam Tasya na Kopa Yujyate. What importance to us is the knowledge of the number of insects. I mean, it's because the omniscient knows everything. So he's trying to say that how important that it is for us. Kumarela again in his Slok Vartika argues against the idea of omniscience, and but Kumarel's main argument is mainly because the Vedas are to be considered as authorless. So for Kumarela, it's not possible for a human being to have omniscience at all, and therefore, in order for to establish that the Vedas are eternal and that they are authorless, these all discussions come into place. But all of this is quite well documented and captured already in this book and many other research papers as well that you would come across in on Jain concept of omniscience. But Ramji Singh has dealt with it in great detail, and there are arguments from the Purva Paksha, then the Jain responses, and it's an excellent survey of Jain text with respect to omniscience. This argument then continues. So Samanta Bhadra then says that, and this is his argument for omniscience further, saying that the objects which are minuscule, like sukshma, concealed or remote, antarita, dura, are known directly by someone, kasyachit pratyaksha, because they are objects of inference, anumeyatvat, like fire, etc. Uh, Agni adi. It is this argument that establishes the existence of an omniscient being, iti sarvagya sanstiti. And this very argument that any object that is an object of inference is also an object of direct perception, pratyaksha. It is not possible for an object to be an object of inference, anumeya, and not be an object of direct perception. So if I can infer fire based on the perception of smoke, that fire has the property of being inferred, and anything that has this property that it can be inferred or it can be known via inference, it also has the property of being known via direct perception, via pratyaksha. So I can infer fire, since I cannot just go to the mountain and look at it, but at the same time a bird flying over by can easily perceive it directly. So this argument needs to be further developed and argued for, and there is some more in the commentaries, but I won't go into that discussion right now. But if this argument has to be presented in the five-fold syllogism that the Indian logical schools like Naiyayikas talk about, This is how it is. The paksha or the pratigya is that direct perception of subtle, concealed, or remote spatio-temporal objects is possible. Hetu, because they are objects of inference. And here comes the vyapti, the udharana, etc. So all objects of inference are objects of direct perception, and that which cannot be directly perceived can also not be an object of inference. Since these are objects of inference, they must be perceived directly by someone. So Upanaya and Nigamana. And what this establishes is that it is possible for someone to perceive everything. How? If we combine this argument with that argument by gradation, so it is possible for someone to have direct perception of certain objects, for someone else to have direct perception of certain others, and so on and so forth. Similarly, there must be someone who must have access to all the objects whatsoever, and such a direct perception, whosoever has, is an omniscient being. Further, the Jainas also talk about the Jina being as Apta, an authoritative teacher. This is again something closer to a divine attribute because this is also connected to divine revelation. Being an Apta allows the Jina to teach, and his teachings are then captured by his disciples, and so on. I'll discuss that again in some time, but this is also from Aptamimansa, and these are all continuing one after the other. So I started with Karika 4 when we talked about the argument for a perfect being. So this was fourth Karika. Then for omniscience, you have the next one immediately, fifth one. And again, Samantha Bhadra just continues saying that you alone are the perfect being, for your teachings are uncontradicted by reason and scripture. Uh, One might ask, like, what do you mean by being uncontradicted by scripture? Because scriptures are nothing but the teachings of the Jinnah. So, how do you contradict yourself? So, here, what he's trying to indicate is that there is no purva para virodha, which is the contradiction in terms of stating something earlier, which eventually is contradicted by something that you have stated later on. So that kind of contradiction is uh, uh, not uh, um, uh, there in the teachings of the Jinnah. And this is Samanta Bhadra's argument, trying to say that he is nirdosha. And nirdosha is like something like being perfect. You're free from all the faults or fallacies or defilements. So at the same time, the Jainas also strongly consider the Jinna to be an object of worship. So the image worship of Jinna is something that's very widely known. The Jains practice worship to a large scale, and there are ceremonies and rituals and many activities that usually you would find in a theistic religion across the globe. So there is also a vibrant and vast devotional literature across centuries since the earliest periods that the Jain texts were being written down. So again, bhakti, even though predominantly present in the theistic schools of Hinduism and also much more in the later Vedanta, some other schools like Ramanujam and others, but uh, the Jainas, I mean, if you look at the entire history of Jains composing devotional stotras and bhaktis and so on, there is a vast and pretty much a large volume of literature does exist, and it remains still less known, which is why these elements do not come up often under discussion. But there is a vibrant tradition of stotras and stutis, etc. Similarly, consecration of statues in new temples and um, yeah, like I also tried to, um, draw out some numbers, and this is what I came across. These are just approximate rough estimates, so do not quote me, but they are coming from some or the other online sources, which I'll look into further and provide some exact data maybe later on. But a rough estimate is what I was able to derive from over here. And when I tried to find out like how what is the ratio of the number of persons per temple, and this is what I was able to find out. Maybe the numbers could be slightly less or more, but more or less it would come down to these. And I was able to see that. I mean, the Jains pretty much well, and it's hard to consider them as atheistic, especially when it comes to temple worship, devotion, etc. And this is also perhaps not inclusive of an entire subsect among Jainas who do not worship image at all, Sthanakvasi Shatambar Jains. So maybe the numbers could be more. I don't know. But the philosophical arguments for worship are, of course, that the Jinnah serves as a moral exemplar. He is considered to be a perfect being, and then the devotees, their devotion is mainly to get inspired and to become like him. And this perhaps remains one of the fundamental difference that one would see. Again, divine revelation is something that the Jainas talk about in a very grand scale. So the Tirthankara delivers sermons in the presence of his chief disciples, known as Ganadharas, in a divine assembly hall, that is Samavasharana. And the disciples then codify the teachings into various scriptures, which come to be known as canons, like agamas. And these are divided into 12 angas, and the scriptures are like literally considered to be the teachings of the Tirthankaras. And later, Jain acharyas composed text based on these agamas, so the post canonical or non canonical literature. So, with this, what emerges is a Jain paradigm of God where there are certain properties which are present, there are certain others which are absent, but both of these sets are applicable simultaneously to one and the same individual. So, on one hand, the Jinnah is considered to be a perfect being, Nirdosha, because he is free from imperfections, but this is something that he has achieved during his life and has eventually put an end to the cycle of life and birth, etc. But it was not something that was given. The Jinnah is also considered to be omniscience and that he is free from ignorance. The Jinnah also has a beginning and that he is not a beginningless entity. The Jinnah does not interact with the universe, has no attachment at all, doesn't even perhaps you can say that it doesn't matter for him whether he is worshipped or not, but at the same time there is no reward, there is no punishment, there is no creation. So complete state of non-attachment is what is glorified. Vitaragata, vitaraga, and on the other hand, raga or karuna or compassion, divine love, etc., are considered to be absent. The Jinnah is also considered to be an authoritative teacher, which is like an apta, and so he's not someone who is unauthoritative. And because of all of these attributes and the absence of certain others, he is considered to be worthy of worship, even though he might not be able to help the subjects. What implications does this have? Well, with respect to problem of evil, and this is the standard argument that you would come across, and I'll just read it once. So, if God exists, then God is omnipotent, omniscient, and morally perfect. If God is omnipotent, then God has the power to eliminate all evil. If God is omniscient, then God knows when evil exists. If God is morally perfect, then God has the desire to eliminate all evil. Evil exists. If evil exists and God exists, then either God doesn't have the power to eliminate all evil, or doesn't know when evil exists, or doesn't have the desire to eliminate all evil. And since all of these three were the premises, then therefore the conclusion is that the God doesn't exist. And this has been the standard argument coming from the atheist, saying that, well, if God uh, creates the universe, then there is this problem of explaining why there is evil in the universe. Perhaps the Jainas, well, they would just not be subjected to this problem, because, well, they would simply say that the Jinnas or the Tirthankaras are morally perfect, they are omniscient, but they do not have the desire to do anything. They do not have the desire to eliminate evil, they do not have the desire to create something good. So, since there is no desire, the evil continues on its own, and neither it is created by the God, nor is there any desire to eliminate it. And therefore, perhaps the problem of evil just couldn't be subjected, um, is not applicable in the Jain case. In fact, across all Indian schools, the one of the reasons why problem of evil was never discussed seriously, there are some discussions, of course. I'm not saying that uh, it's completely absent, but still, in comparison to how Western theologians were engaged with this issue, one would find very less engagement among Indian philosophers with respect to problem of evil. And one of the reason could probably be the notion of karma. And since karmas take care of moral retribution, etc., um, the problem of evil still exists for the theistic schools, at least when it comes to creation. But apart from that, the karmas are usually called in to explain why good things happen with bad people and so on. And with respect to the problem of consciousness, now this is something that is also interesting, because if God does not create the universe, and if the jiva with consciousness exists since beginningless time, then consciousness is not an emergent property, for at least for the Jainas. So if that is the case, then maybe the Jainas do not have to explain consciousness. Why does consciousness exist? Well, it exists since beginningless time. There is no point in history where the jiva was without consciousness. And in fact, consciousness is considered to be the distinguishing mark, the lakshana of the jiva. And unlike the Nayayikas, where, once you become liberated, consciousness will cease to exist, and even at the time of creation, the jiva was without any gunas and there was no consciousness. The Jainas would say that the jiva is always with consciousness, whether in samsara or in moksha. And since consciousness was not created, and since it is uh, uh, an indistinguishable quality of the jiva, it's not an emerging property. And if it is not an emerging property, then there is no need to explain how it came into being. This perhaps has implications in trying to address the hard problem of consciousness and so on. So, and I'll just leave this slide and I'll stop here. I think I have taken sufficient time. I don't know. Yeah, I think I'm done. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jinesh. Yes, following your paper. Now, GC, I invite Shikla ma'am to say a few words and initiate the discussion. Ma'am, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Jinesh, for that lovely, very explanatory kind of presentation. I really rejoiced, but I have conceptual uh, disjunctions, disagreements, which I will address towards the close. But let the discussion start. I will take my chance at the end so that it doesn't influence others. Yeah. Others, please. Those who have queries or if you want to append something to what he has said, you are welcome. Please go ahead. Can you all raise your hands and then I'll see. No one? So probably I should start. Shimi, should I start speaking and then others will follow, or should we wait for them?
Yes, ma'am. I just want to means you could have to tell something. After that, we can do the discussion.
Jinesh, huh, uh, in Vedanta, we honor someone by taking a critical outlook. When Shankara was traveling along the borders of Bihar, an old Mimamsaka stopped him and then asked him, "Oh, you are that young Vedantin from the south. I heard that you are arguing very well." Then Shankara said, "Don't waste time tributing me. Let us get engaged in arguments. Vade vade jayate tatra bodha." So, arguments are placed to when somebody is impressed with the presentation of another, then he debates. Otherwise, he will just dismiss it. So, that is it. Uh, to start with your first position, your concern over the Nastika Astika division, I totally agree with you. And then let us all understand that during the colonial period and soon after the independence, Indian philosophers, so-called Indian philosophers, were all following Sarvadarshana Sangraha pattern. And today we realize that the Sarvadarshana Sangraha pattern need not be strict, though that's not a wrong model, but nevertheless, that is not the only model. And today we all agree to that, and then there are alternate models, and we all know that Buddhism has so much been, Jainism always remained in India, but Buddhism was taken up by several other countries, so much so that we talk of Indian Buddhism today. That is the worst to happen. My appeal is that the Astika Nastika division was anyway never based on theistic atheistic division, but rather on the subscription to the Vedic authority or non-Vedic authority. And theism, atheism hardly had any role. And as a matter of fact, God was never a great topic of discussion. uh, Please, I would like to stand corrected. Uh, God was never a huge topic of discussion until Ramanuja came up in 10th century, 10th, 11th century. The later Vedantins, the Agama tradition, and of course Udayana in 10th century Nyaya gave proofs for the existence of God. You were asking who has given proofs for the existence of God. To my knowledge, it is Udayanacharya of 10th century, Nayayika, who has given proofs for the existence of God. And earlier, we don't find such proofs for the existence of God. As a matter of fact, God was never was never in the center stage, for that matter, even in Advaita or in only with the agamic traditions, like the Ramanuja has made a fine combination of Vaishnavism as well as Vedanta, where God was, of course, brought to the center stage. Anyway, so that is one observation of mine. And uh, then my basic query to you, Jinesh, is this: that when God gets postulated as a metaphysical item, the fundamental question is, what is the job of this metaphysical item to fulfill? Why is it that God has been brought forward? What is the job that you want to assign to God?
Uh-huh. So,
We don't. Yes.
so you're asking this question. Should I respond now?
No, I haven't wound up. I'll just complete the
Yeah,
argument. You can
yeah,
write it
yeah,
down, and then
yeah,
there are,
yeah.
a cluster of arguments so that.
Sure, sure.
So, uh, so I think it is a wrong question to ask a Jain, what is, where is your God? Why is it that you are not discussing on the topic of God? After all, God is a fine metaphysical item. Why is it that you don't find any reference of God in your philosophy? I think it is a wrong question to ask to Jainism. Probably it is a very fine question to ask Advaitin, because for no reason they have brought in God. Of course, Shankara says that he has reason, but it can be debated. But to Ramanuja, we don't ask, because without God, he can't move ahead. God is at the center stage. But for Advaitins, it can be debated. So you can very well ask an Advaitin, what is the role? Why did you bring it? There is a point of debate. But to either Jainism or Buddhism, I think it is a wrong question to ask why God is not being discussed. So this is my basic observation, because and I have, I'm sorry, I don't follow the Western mode of argument. So probably I am someone. I'm very totally rooted in India. So what I feel is how we have been arguing is that when you pick up a school, we go to the soul of the school. What is it that that school wants to speak about, and touch that core of it and then develop? So that is how we have been arguing. So to my mind, when Jaina speak about the concept of Kevali, and of course, Kevali do share a lot of properties which we very commonly attribute to God, doesn't mean that we need to make an equation between these two. Kevali is God, or God is Kevali, or bring down God to the level of Kevali, or raise Kevali to the level of God. Both of these exercises are not necessary philosophically. This is my observation. And your comparison with, did you compare with Augustine, one of the scholastic philosophers? Was it Saint Augustine or
Yeah, I was not comparing, but I was just trying to show that one of the arguments
gradation?
that the Jainas talk about for a perfect being is the argument by gradation, and Aquinas also referred to that.
Saint Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah.
Again, Saint Thomas Aquinas, they give proofs for the existence of God, and then they say that you see lesser virtues here, and then think of the highest of that, and that is God. So, I mean, he is trying to argue what, I mean, trying to help an ordinary being conceive what God could be. That doesn't, again, mean that, the basic disagreement for me in bringing this topic of theism in Jainism is that, probably to my mind, please correct me, I have very basic and very peripheral understanding of Jainism, is that they have other beautiful things to discuss. It's a very beautiful system, very beautiful system. And of course, you can discuss, accuse them why you did not discuss on God. But I think we are missing the point with regard to Jains, and you had addressed this from the problem of evil. That is typical Western way of arguing for theistic precision. And you have, of course, you have very rightly said that karma takes care of, and so therefore we don't discuss from the angle of the problem of evil. So that you have resolved. And with regard to devotion, so you said that there is a lot of devotion that has been that is seen around in the Jaina religion. So we can in some way conclude that they are theistic. Devotion can be to anybody. You can have a devotion to your parents. You can have a devotion to anyone. And Ishvara, in fact, is an attribute. Who is a Bhagavan? Bhagavan is someone who has 64 attributes. And when you have some of them seen in people, you call them Bhagavan. When somebody has 1 crore rupees, you call him Kotishwara. So he has become all in a sudden he becomes Ishwara. So these are Lakshanika Prayoga. We are not saying that you are Bhagavan indeed, but you are like Bhagavan. So, Gina or Kevali, but again, quickly, when we say that you call them gods, the Kevali is called God. That's a Lakshanika Prayoga. It is not saying, we are not saying, now, if you ask, oh, in that case, is it the case that the Jina is not God? Again, it's a wrong question. Because the very concept of God is not there. So you don't have to either equate or not equate God with Jina. You have very rightly said that actually you have almost answered to all my questions in your papers, but then I think there was a great effort made to bring in the concept of theism or impose theism onto Jainism, which to my mind is not necessary. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Um,
Please
Thank you
go ahead.
so much. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your comments and observations and the questions that you have raised. Um, I would simply just say one thing, and that is that the text that I was discussing, Samantabhadra and Vidyanandan,
Mhm.
in their text, they literally are trying to uh, develop a Jain notion of an apta, which is like a perfect being. At the same time, they are offering arguments for the non possibility of other notions of perfect beings. So Vidyanandan, for instance, has arguments that says that it's not possible to be anupaya siddha, and he argues for upaya siddha. Vidyanandan and Samantabhadra both also argue very strongly for omniscience, etc., and many other such things. So I understand that Kevlin or the Jina could not be equated with God, but at the same time, these categories have always been, I mean, the very notion of God has been dominated by the biblical scholarship or the notion of God as we find in, uh, I mean, I mean, Islamic, Judaism, or Hindu conceptions, or Christian conceptions of God. So the whole suggestion or the argument was on those lines that, and it's the text that I was trying to bring into the discussion, and it's not just my view that I was trying to introduce, but the texts themselves are strongly making a case for such a discussion, such that the categories of theism and atheism could be more broad and more inclusive, that makes these kinds of positions somewhere mapped into that theism atheism spectrum. Because today, like, philosophy of religion has moved into in different directions, and there are some philosophers like who have also talked about a maximal concept of God, and that is just that there are attempts to even define what is meant by theism. How do you define theism such that it includes all theistic schools, at least, let alone those like Jainism and Buddhism? I mean, even if we bracket them, still, even among theistic schools, it's not possible to include all of them if we stick to just one notion of God. Secondly, I mean, the terms that the Jainas use, like Ishvara, Deva, I mean, all of these are just Sanskrit equivalents of God as we find in other schools. The question just remains then is that is there just one concept of God, or I mean, is the issue of translation, or is the issue of trying to see how a God can be viewed in different ways, or how different systems talk about a supreme being. So if it is about translation, then yeah, I do agree that God perhaps is not the correct term to represent what the Jainas talk about. But if we talk about a perfect spiritual being, an entity, or someone who is just uh, divine, or someone who is um, having certain such attributes that could be worshipped, that could be um, considered as something to be closer to theism, then maybe the categories of theism and atheism might be revisited and defined in a way that it makes such frameworks inclusive of it. But I really would think more on these lines and see whether it is possible at all to talk about God, or should we just leave this notion aside and stick to how the Jains talk about Tirthankaras or Jinnas in a very brief and non argumentative way. But thank you so much, ma'am, for all your comments and questions. I'll see how I can develop this further. Thank you.
Jinesh ji, Professor Kusum Jain would be a very fine referential point. My understanding of Jainism is very fundamental and basic, and I'm very apprehensive because it's a great system of thought, and then I try to catch the soul of every system and then argue about it. So from these great masters like Professor Sabat, Professor Kusum Jain, all of them have spoken on this. So if I have any understanding of it, it is because I've heard from these big people. And so please get to her and then ratify your positions. She would be a fine point of discussion for all the young
Yeah.
people. I wish that she's been invited for this. I did not notice that it was on Jainism. Otherwise, I would have invited her. In no time, she would tell you whether we
Yeah.
can, enrich on this. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
Uh, Are there others who would like to join the discussion? He was very fluent and, I mean, very clear in her presentation. I liked it. Very, very clear in what he wanted to say. That's You are indeed a role model for kind of a presentation. You spoke your mind out. That's great. How long you have been doing research, Jinesh?
So I just started as a postdoc, and this paper is not part of
Oh,
my main research, but it
oh,
just
oh,
cropped up, and I've been working on it for some time now. So,
okay.
but my main project here as a postdoc was to um, engage with problems of philosophy and Anekantavada. So my PhD was on Anekantavada, and I'm trying to take forward one of the ideas during my PhD that I couldn't pursue during this postdoc here at Birmingham.
Hmm.
And I just started last month, so it hasn't progressed as such. It's just a start, and I'll continue to work for.
Yet another, I do not know whether I can say this, but forgive me if I'm wrong. Like those who are working outside India, uh, like, of course, we have global philosophy, but all our systems and traditions are deeply rooted in our culture. So when you raise issues in Jainism, like I was trying to point out the problem of evil. So we say try to place yourself in the cultural lab in which the tradition has been placed and try to view that. Only then you'll be able to do justice to that school. Just yesterday or 2 days before, when Professor Anand Vaidya was making a presentation, and so he was trying to draw distinction. By the way, about your Yes, and that I forgot to tell you. Uh, about your hard problem of consciousness, you're saying that anyway, Jiva has consciousness. It is not an emergent property. Jiva always had consciousness, so you don't have to answer the hard problem of consciousness. No, not at all. See, hard problem of consciousness is trying to understand the qualia, the subjective element, whether it is emergent or whether it is innate is not the issue. The issue is what consciousness indeed is, how it is different from an object. So whether you have it, uh, since eternity or all through, or whether it is an evolutionary product, is not the question. The question is, how do you define consciousness? What is unique about consciousness? How do you explain the subjective element, or what is called, they call something else, the missing link between the subjective and the objective? So when Anand was talking about the distinction between the problem of the self, that is, consciousness is the self, and consciousness as a problem of consciousness and problem of self, and he was arguing that Shankara was addressing the problem of self, and uh, Ramanuja, for instance, was arguing, discussing the problem of consciousness. Then I appealed to him that I don't find this distinction. And then I heard myself saying this. Some of those who are attending today's conference also heard me saying that. So I said, I tried to meditate on Shankara, ask him whether I'm right, because it's very crucial. And then he did not come to me, so I could not discuss. So I'm not very sure whether what I'm saying is right, but then I intuitively feel that your distinction is not right. Uh, then he said he'll think about that. There were other Dvaidins also, though nobody picked up that thing. So what I'm trying to drive at is, let us get to the root of the thought and try to grasp what the school or the system or the person wants to put forth, and that probably will not reach always. Particularly, you are a very young researcher, but you are very much on the track. But then I'm just telling to all the young researchers who have assembled here, let us go to the root of the thought and then try to grasp what the thinker or the system is trying to say. Let's not bother what the other part of the globe would say, whether we are at par with them, whether we can place our system at par with the way they think. All this needn't be our worries. I suppose so, Jinesh. I do not know because I'm happily staying in a small place as in India, and so I'm very comfortable. I did not know your positions, but I think, uh, see, cross-cultural studies have their limitations, huge limitations, and it is very, very difficult, very raised to any number, to convince another what, for instance, a Kavili is. It's very hard to understand. What is this? He is omniscient, omnipotent. What are you trying to say? And then I also heard Anand was asking about like the Jivan Mukta state. Have you experienced this? Somebody was asking. So have you experienced that? We don't have any authority other than the Shruti text. It's not that you and I haven't experienced any consciousness which is non-intentional, because always we experience consciousness as intentional. And so when you argue about a non-intentional consciousness, you'll have to resort to Shruti text. There is no other source. But then if somebody says that, oh, no, authority, we don't accept authority, then you are lost. You have no place to stand. This is one great difficulty for those who work at the global level, like how to make this cross-cultural studies. Jinesh, I would like to listen to your response to what I've said.
So yeah, of course, I mean there are many limitations to it, and I think Matilal and some other Indian philosophers of the last generation, like maybe even Mohanty and some others, did make an attempt to engage with Western philosophical traditions vis-a-vis Indian
Mm,
schools. And I also agree, like comparative philosophy, cross-cultural philosophy, and such endeavors sometimes might do injustice to both the traditions that are under discussion. And I um, I personally I'm not too much into it right now. What I am trying to suggest or do is look at some of the problems of philosophy that Jain philosophers have engaged with, but seeing that whether their commitment to non one-sidedness is applicable even in such context where they have some positions, like let's say in soteriology, in ethics. Does non
mm,
one-sidedness has any application to those categories, or is it just a metaphysical thing? And there are some questions that I am trying to address along the line. So this paper that I presented today was simply springing from some of the texts that I had studied during my undergraduate days, and with the idea that the categories of theism and atheism um, needs to be more inclusive, and that it could be revised and redefined in new ways. That's all I was trying to suggest.
Thank you. And those who are working in Jainism, so my appeal is that we have a great tradition who provides very creative suggestions for environmental crisis, to address how to limit the onslaught of technology. These are, and then the regarding economics, their contributions are wonderful. So I really wish that people like Jinesh bring forth, because the world needs it. The world really needs a philosophical solution. Where are the philosophers who were the first flying birds who used to show the path to the rest of the community as to what should be the policy for us? So I really look
Yeah,
forward for you all to take the lead. Thank you very much for that.
thank you so much, ma'am. I think someone from the audience had raised hand.
Please, I cannot.
Bhupesh, yeah,
Who's that?
Bhupesh,
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 please go ahead.
yeah.
Bhupesh, please go ahead.
Hello, am I audible, Dr. Jinesh?
Yeah,
You are
sir.
good.
I'm
Yeah.
audible.
Yes, thank you so much. So, thank you so much for the lecture. Just wanted to take it up from where you ended regarding the question of categories. Um, so um, when we are talking about the question of God in Jainism, and we are sort of trying to construct, I mean, we are trying to understand it, but in the process, probably also we are sort of constructing the notion of God in Jainism. As in, of course, you just said that there are, in fact, instances where there are clear examples where Jaina texts and Jaina authors do explicitly mention the category of God and explicitly try um, to explain it as well. But also, I think, as a scholar, when we are talking as scholars, when we are talking about these categories, not only are we just taking up those examples where these definitions are clear cut and discussed in a clear sort of a manner, we are also trying to put that data in a larger sort of construct of of the idea of God, and then we can, sort of compare that construct with the construct that we have in the Western notion of God. So, so my question is that when we are doing this construction on the Jaina side, uh, can we be sure when we are in the territory of study of religions discipline and when we have crossed into the territory of theology? I mean, when are we doing theology versus when are we doing, study of religion? And why I'm asking you this is because I'm myself struggling with this problem. I am a student of goddess-centered traditions, so I am looking at texts such as the Devi Mahatmya and the Devi Bhagavata Puran, and I am trying to myself understand and construct the notion of God or goddess as found in these Shakta texts or mainstream Shakta texts. So I'm myself struggling with this idea whether I am uh, I'm being able to limit myself to the scientific study of religion, which is the discipline of study of religion, or am I crossing into this region of theology? So can you sort of explain to me how we should look at it? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your question. So, what I think is that in amongst Indian philosophical traditions, I mean, this division was never so strongly felt that theologians, philosophers, and religious scholars are like way different than one another. Many a times the roles overlapped for them, so the same person when writing one text becomes a theologian and when writing another text becomes a philosopher. So it was hard to draw lines amongst schools of Indian philosophy, except maybe Charvakas or um, some others, but most of the time the authors shared a lot of in terms of intellectual background and their own systematic presuppositions, the axioms that they subscribe to. So it's hard to exactly categorize them differently, but it depends. If we are trying to draw out arguments from text, then of course we are doing study of religion rather than just a theological discourse, because when we try to discuss arguments and counter arguments and try to see which which ones are consistent, which is inconsistent, and um, how X implies Y and how Y then negates Z and so on. I mean, these are all basic stuff that happens in any philosophical argument. So, in that sense, yeah, it is a study of religion. And the point when it would become a study in terms of theology or a theological discourse is when argumentation and asking questions and critical thinking ceases to exist. Maybe that is when it turns into a theological study.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Um, I think before winding up, I request Narmada ma'am, could you please comment Jinesh paper? After that, we can wind up the session.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jinesh, congratulations. Very nice presentation. Though you didn't, in depth, you have studied this topic, still you have beautifully highlight the points and compare it with different philosophical tradition which you have bring into your paper. It's really commendable. I like your paper very much. You should work more on this, as already Sri Lekha madam has said. What are the inputs you will put it in this paper so that you can enrich it more. All the best. Thank you so much, English.
Thank you so much. Um, I would also once again like to thank this forum and Professor Shrikala ma'am and Dr. Namrata ma'am and of course Dr. Shimi for inviting me. Yeah, I think.
Okay, thank you so much, Nabita ma'am. And
Thank you so much.
many thanks to Srikala ma'am for the wonderful discussion. Actually, we are keenly listening to you both. Anyway, so I invite Mr. Bhupesh Goyal, one of the executive members of GFYP, to propose the official order of thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shemi. I want to thank Dr. Jinesh, Jinesh Sheth for taking out time to present his views uh, today with us. Thank you, Jinesh. Uh, he talked about the Jaina position on God and how it goes beyond the categories of theism and atheism as defined in the Western tradition. He pointed out how, to a certain extent, Jainism embraces both these categories while at the same time uh, it, on certain point, rejects both of these categories. He pointed out some of the important notions regarding which the Jainas stand in opposition to the theistic view, like in the case of imagining God uh, as a creator God. So Jainas are against the view of viewing God as the creator God. They are against, and in some cases, that is against the idea of an eternal God or the God with a divine will, or one who is gracious, one who is one and only, eternal and loving. So they challenged these notions of the theistic schools, but at the same time, they sometimes accepted or forwarded the notions of theistic schools, which viewed God as a perfect being, as being omniscient, as somebody who should be worshipped and who's authoritative and who is the revealer of ultimate truth. So the implications of Jaina's non-binary position on important questions in philosophy, like the problem of evil and the hard problem of consciousness, were also discussed at the end. So thank you so much, Dr. Jinesh Sheth, for taking out time and giving this lecture in this forum. We really hope to see you again with another lecture. I want to also thank Dr. Namrata Kothari, ma'am, for introducing the theme, and also Dr. Shimi Simani for moderating today's session and for giving the welcome address. Last but not least, I want to thank Dr. Professor Srikala M. Nair for being the guiding light of this forum and inspiring us to take up these monthly discussions. Thank you so much, ma'am, and a good evening to everyone.
Thank
We
you,
can now
Bhupesh.
discuss.
Thank you, Anand. Thank you,
Thank
Jinesh.
you. Thank you once again, everyone, for patience listening. I'll leave the meeting now.
Please, thank you so much.